Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So a few weeks ago I did my first builds for the new class in D&D, the Artificer. And both those builds I did were Battlesmith builds. There's three different subclasses for the Artificer. There's the Battlesmith, the Artillerist, and the Alchemist. Both those were Battlesmith builds. One was a Gnome Cavalier that rode on a steel mount. The other one was essentially a Beastmaster Ranger, except unlike a Beastmaster Ranger, it had a Steel Defender as its animal companion, and unlike a Beastmaster Defender, we found, using the math, it was effective, and it didn't require any special tricks to do so. It was pretty easy to do. One was more of a tank, and one was more of a striker, but both good builds. And I've heard people talk about the Artificer with disappointment, because Unearthed Arcana, of course, had the Artificer quite powerful, and then they scaled it back when they made it official. And so you look at what's left, and it's disappointing. This is often my issue with Unearthed Arcana, and why I tend to avoid it, because then when I look at a class like this, it creates a bias. But I looked at this class fresh, and when I looked at it, I thought, Battlesmith works reasonably well. Did a couple builds, and it does. I looked at the Alchemist and thought, this is a problem, because this subclass relies on these elixirs. These elixirs aren't things you're using in combat. They're things you're doing outside of combat, like giving to party members to heal them up or whatever. What do they do in combat? Fire a cantrip? Well, they're not going to be very effective firing just a cantrip unless there's something added on, and what they're adding on isn't nearly enough. So I'm just not on board with the Alchemist, and I've heard people say, well, there's ways you can make more elixirs. Yeah, but it's still, that doesn't answer the big question: what do they do in combat to not feel useless? So yeah, the Alchemist, I'm there. I'm not happy with the Alchemist. But the Artillerist was one I thought looked reasonably good, because they're also firing a cantrip in combat, but unlike the Alchemist, they actually have other things to do in combat as well. Mainly their cannon. So their cannon is also delivering damage in combat. So when you combine that with a cantrip, I thought it looks like it might do reasonable damage. But does it? Today I want to do a build. And I want to do the exact build you would think an artillerist would be. When I think about an artillerist, I'm thinking about a pretty heavily armored artificer with a bunch of guns. But I just want to make that and see how it works out with the math. And so what we're going to do is we're going to compare it. I did math for the Beastmaster build I did at levels 4, 8, 12, and 17. I want to do the same math with this build and see how it compares. Because if an artillerist can't do reliable damage, there's no point in playing one. That's really clearly what they're supposed to be good at. So let's take a look and see how the build turns out. Let's get started. Now, when I did a build for the Artillerist, I was starting to put it together, and I realized it reminded me of something a lot. I used to play a game called Rifts for Palladium. Not a good game, I don't recommend it, but there was one class in it that kind of overwhelmed everyone else, and they were called Glitter Boys. And when I look at this Artillerist, it really kind of reminded me a lot of a Glitter Boy. So that is kind of how I thought of this character thematically. Okay, so here is our character, and what we're going to do is we're going to just keep the Eberron content so that we can access the Artificer. So let's move into race. And what I want to do here is, because I'm thinking of this character as kind of a big robotic kind of guy, I'm thinking Warforged is the way I'm going to go. And Warforged actually works well for every class, because with ability score increases, you're getting that +2 Constitution score that's good for any class, and then we can choose any other ability score. So whatever your primary ability score is, you're going to take that. In our case, that's Intelligence. Now, if you haven't seen the Warforged before, after it has come out officially, what you first thing to note is that they don't age. They basically are built fully grown, and they stay that way. Alignment, nothing really to go with there. Medium is the size. Speed is 30 feet. Constructed resilience is pretty important, because you get advantage on saving throws against being poisoned and resistance to the damage. Those are nice. They're not unique to the Warforged, of course. And then you don't need to eat, drink, or breathe. Not needing to breathe is certainly useful if you think that you're going to go underwater, for example. I might even wonder how it would interact with something like a stinking cloud. That would probably be up to your DM. You're immune to disease, and you don't need to sleep, and magic can't put you to sleep. And speaking of sleeping, Sentry's Rest, when you would be sleeping, you take a long rest. You take at least 6 hours in an active, motionless state rather than sleeping. And while you're in that state, you can see and hear as normal. So if your party is taking a long rest and you need somebody to stand guard, your Warforged can basically stand guard the entire night. So that's pretty useful. Or if the other members of the party are taking turns doing watches, you were basically an extra set of eyes on every single watch. Then we're going to get integrated protection. That gives us a +1 bonus to armor class. That's lovely to have. And then when we don armor, it's integrated into our body. And I'm envisioning that as making us look big and more robotic when we put half plate on. And then we're kind of fulfilling that look that I had envisioned for this character. Then we have a specialized design. We're going to pick a skill and a tool. This character is a blaster, and he's got a cannon. He's going to have a gun. I'm thinking intimidation is the way to go. And then when it comes to proficiencies, we're going to have lots of tool proficiencies through Artificer. Probably all the tool proficiencies we're probably going to use. So what I was thinking with this character is he makes cannons, he makes guns. So maybe what he would do is convert carts into horseless carriages that are kind of tanks. Maybe he would convert ships into battleships. So I'm going to take vehicles land as part of his specialized design. And then the language, it's going to be campaign dependent, but I think we'll just go with Draconic here. So then let's go into our class and we'll pick our Artificer. And what we want to do is pick our 2 beginning proficiencies. So our 2 skills we're going to pick. First, I'm going to pick Perception, always a useful skill to have. It's used more than any other skill in the game. And then Arcana. I think that's really good for Artificers. It certainly fits thematically, and it's based on our intelligence. Then we're going to pick an Artisan's Tool. I like Alchemist Supplies because Alchemist Supplies can help us make things like Alchemist Fire or Acid Flasks, just more things that blow up, and that's kind of what we do with this character. Then we're going to go into our background, and the background I'm going to pick is Shipwright. And I've already got land vehicles. This will give me water vehicles. And we're going to get the history skill proficiency, which is based on our intelligence, which is good. And then we're going to pick 1 additional skill. And I'm thinking if we're going to be spending time on ships, we might be doing things like swinging off the rigging, that kind of thing. So probably should go with acrobatics. So now we're going to go into our ability scores. With our ability scores, we're going to do a point buy. And the first thing we want to do is make sure our intelligence is a 16. And then the second thing we want to do is we're going to get a +2 bonus to Constitution. So if we take a 14 with our Constitution, that gives us a starting 16. That's really good starting Constitution score. Now, because we wear medium armor, generally the dexterity I like to have is 14. That gives us the +2 bonus, which is the maximum bonus you can have when you're wearing medium armor. So that is kind of what I would do there. And that gives us 4 points remaining, and you can put those wherever you want. I'm thinking I don't want this character to be weak, so we'll give him an average strength, and then we'll give him an average wisdom, and the charisma, well, he's going around blowing stuff up all the time, so maybe the charisma is low for that reason. Then we're going to go into our equipment, and we choose our starting equipment. Note that an Artificer cannot start with a shield with their starting equipment, but we will be able to get scale mail armor, so we're going to do that for sure. Light crossbow and 20 bolts, probably what we're going to be using most of the time at level 1. Then at level 3, we'll be switching into more of a blast kind of thing. Then we pick 2 simple weapons. Well, I don't have a good strength, and we only have simple weapons, so I guess dagger in case I get caught in melee. But the other one, I just picked something that I thought some other party member might want. We're going to get our Thieves' Tools to begin. We can use those, remember, as a spellcasting focus in a Dungeoneer's pack. Then we're going to get Carpenter's Tools. We can also use those as a spellcasting focus. And those are our Artisan's Tools that we need for certain class abilities. So Carpenter's Tools will fit under that. And so we'll add all that starting equipment. And what we're going to go ahead and do is we will equip our light crossbow. and our dagger, and our scale mail armor. And again, what we want to do is get a shield as soon as we can, and what we want to do is upgrade to half plate as soon as we can. This is not a stealth character, so I'm not worried about that. So now we're going to pick our spells. And now with the known spells, starting with our cantrips, first thing I'm going to pick is Firebolt. This is a blasting character. Firebolt is kind of the iconic blast spell. We got a good range, 120 feet, D10 damage is respectable, and it scales at levels 5, 11, and 17. Now, I might want another blast spell just in case. What if somebody is immune to fire, for example? So let's grab Acid Splash. This is also a saving throw spell instead of an attack spell, which can be useful if somebody has cover or if we're facing disadvantage. Now, Acid Splash does less damage. It does a d6 damage, but if we can get two enemies next to each other, we can hit them both. So we can potentially do pretty good damage with Acid Splash. Now at level 3, we're going to need to remove Acid Splash so we can get our Mending Cantrip, which we are going to need at level 3. Then we're going to pick 3 prepared spells. Now, I will say that we can only cast 2 spells, so we want to have at least 1 ritual here. And Detect Magic, I think, is the ritual I'd go with. Then I pretty much always go with Fairy Fire with an Artificer at level 1. I think it's probably your best bet. And then I'm going to pick 1 more spell that I might cast. And I'm going to pick Catapult. Now, Catapult I normally don't pick, but I normally don't play blasters. This is somebody who can make Alchemist Fire, who can make acid flasks. I'll want to get an Alchemist kit to do that, but I can do that probably reasonably soon. And then I can cast it with Catapult, and it's going to fly in a straight line, and when it strikes a creature, they make a saving throw. If they fail their saving throw, they take 3d8 bludgeoning damage. If they make their saving throw, it continues going forward. So if there's anyone behind them, it might hit them. So we have multiple chances to make this work. And then I figure if it is an Alchemist Fire or an Acid Flask that we're throwing, then it's going to do additional damage on top of that. So we can actually do reasonably good blast damage with the Catapult spell. So we get to our first level character pretty quick. Now again, this is just a standard Artificer right now, and blasting isn't really going to be our specialty until we take Artillerist at level 3. But we do have Firebolt, we do have Catapult, so we can do some blast things. But mainly at first level, most Artificers are just going to be spellcasters, and they're just as good as a regular spellcaster. They get their 2 first level spells just like any other spellcaster is going to get at level 1. But what I want to do here is I want to jump it to level 3, and that way we can look and see what the Artificer is giving us. So when we go into level 3, first thing we're going to get is we're going to get our Artificer infusions, and we're going to pick 4 of those, but we can have 2 of them active at any one time. And the one we're going to keep for ourselves is Enhanced Arcane Focus. This way we can use it to boost our blast spells because we can cast them through our Arcane Focus and get a +1 bonus to hit with them. We also ignore half cover, and this will scale. At level 10, we're going to get a +2. And I generally think that getting the specialized arcane focuses that give bonuses to attack, they do exist within the base rules, but I think they come up less commonly than magic weapons. Certainly, in my experience, they have. Then we're going to pick 3 more options, and this is mostly going to be stuff that I probably wouldn't keep for myself. So maybe we'll take Enhanced Defense. That would give us an option to boost somebody's armor. Maybe we'll take Magic Weapon, and that would give us a chance to boost somebody's weapon. And then let's take Replicate Magic Item, and we'll grab a Bag of Holding here. And that would be kind of a utility thing, and it would be something that I probably wouldn't do most of the time. But if we ended up in a situation where we needed one, after a long rest, I could create one. Right tool for the job will give us the ability to create other kinds of tools. We'll need Tinker's tools, so if we don't have them yet, we're going to want to get them. By 3rd level, I would think that we would have Tinker's tools. I would think that we would have the Alchemist tools we need. And frankly, I think we would probably also have a shield by now. Maybe even half plate, though half plate's pretty expensive. So it really depends on the campaign. Some campaigns you might have to wait a couple levels. So now we're going to pick Artillerist, and let's see what it gives us. The first thing it's going to give us is a tool proficiency. So So the tool proficiency we're going to get is with woodcarver's tools, and those are the tools we need to use to create our various artillerist stuff. So if we don't have woodcarver's tools, use your artificer's tools and the right tool for the job to make them, or go buy them as soon as you can. Uh, the main things we're going to get are the spells and the cannon. So if we look at the spells, we're going to see there's a definite theme here. We got Thunderwave, Scorching Ray, Shatter, Fireball, Ice Storm, Wall of Fire, Cone of Cold, Wall of Force. So these are by and large blast spells. Wall of Force, Wind Wall, and Shield are basically the only non-blast spells on here. And Shield and Wall of Force certainly are really good spells. Wind Wall is pretty circumstantial and isn't going to come up very often. But Shield, Wall of Force, both good spells. 17th level is really late to get Wall of Force, but even then, it's still a good spell at that level. But the main reason we took Artillerist is to get the Eldritch Cannon. So at 3rd level, we learn how to make the magic cannon. We can do so after any long rest. And what happens is that you make the cannon and it will last for an hour. And you can choose one of 3 different kinds of cannons to make. We can make a flamethrower cannon, a force ballista, or a protector cannon. The protector cannon is the most unique in that instead of doing damage, it creates temporary hit points. So if you were to do a protector cannon, what you would do is at the beginning, as soon as you make it, you would have it go off again and again and again until you rolled an 8 on a d8, and everyone would get the maximum number of temporary hit points, which for us at this level would be 11 temporary hit points. And then you would take the protector cannon with you into combat, and every time anybody took damage, you would have it go off again, and they would recover some temporary hit points. And potentially, at this level, that could be really powerful, especially if you have a lot of melee characters. Bringing that protector cannon into melee with them, we can definitely boost things and make it very hard for them to take any real damage beyond temporary hit points. And then in between combats again, you would have it go off again and again until they got their maximum number. And then the next one is the Force Ballista. And the Force Ballista has a great range, does a great kind of damage, which is force damage, and it uses our spell attack. So if we're using our enhanced arcane focus, we would get that bonus with the Force Ballista as well. And if they're hit, they are moved 5 feet away. And then there's the Flamethrower. And the Flamethrower is the one actually we're going to be using most of the time. What it does is it exhales fire in a 15-foot cone, and anyone in the cone makes a dexterity saving throw, 2d8 fire damage on a failed save, half on a successful one. And the reason we want to use Flamethrower over the Force Ballista, there's 2 main reasons. The first reason is, technically speaking, even with the bonus to hit with the Force Ballista, the save for half damage is going to end up being slightly more than we're going to get with the Force Ballista. But the big thing is the 15-foot cone, because if we can hit a second creature with the Flamethrower, it increases our damage a lot, and I will show you the math on that. So the chance of hitting that second creature is worth doing the Flamethrower. Now, when we do a cannon, we can choose its size. We can choose it to be either small or tiny. If it's small, it takes up a space. If it's tiny, it can share a person's space. And then we can choose whether it has legs or not. I would generally give it legs, and then it can do movement or a climb up to 15 feet in a round. So what would I have it climb on? Well, I'd have it climb on a melee character in the group, and it would kind of become their shoulder-mounted cannon. And then they would go into melee. That's going to bring the flamethrower into the range we want it to be so that it can hit creatures and hopefully hit multiple creatures. So definitely this is something you want on a melee character. Now we could make our artillerist a melee character. There's cantrips we could take that just have saving throws like Acid Splash, and Frostbite comes up to mind as well. And we could potentially go into combat. I mean, we have a good armor class. We're going to have decent hit points. And then we could have it as our shoulder-mounted cannon, if that's thematically what you want to do. But in this case, we're going to have our main character be ranged, and then the cannon is going to go into melee with another party member. Now, the cannon itself, if it is attacked, it can be destroyed. And ultimately, it does have a reasonable amount of hit points. A reasonable armor class, 18 armor class, 5 times our artificer level and hit points. And if it takes damage, we can heal it with the mending spell. So we definitely need the mending spell cantrip right now. because we want to get our full hour out of our cannon. Uh, Now, what will happen is the hour is going to end up being used up, especially when you take a short rest. In fact, it'll probably last until your short rest. And then when you take a short rest, it's gone. And now you can create a new cannon by expending a spell slot. And even a first level spell slot's good enough, and that's definitely what we would want to be doing. So what I would be doing is after a short rest, I would definitely be spending a spell slot to get another Eldritch Cannon. That means I'm not spending very many spell slots on actual spells anymore, because right now I'm going to have 3 first level spells. I get 1 cannon for free. If I take, say, 2 short rests, then I'm going to need 2 first level slots to make Eldritch Cannons, and I only have 3 first level slots. It's definitely worthwhile. A first level slot for an Eldritch Cannon is a no-brainer. You should absolutely do it every single time. Another thing to note is if it ever comes into play where, let's say we have the flamethrower going and suddenly we need the force ballista. Maybe somebody is immune to fire, so flamethrower suddenly became useless to us. We can expend a spell slot and 1 action to make a new cannon, and then the old cannon disappears, so we can make that change pretty quickly if we need to. We're going to get 1 more prepared spell at this level. Again, I just mentioned we're not going to really be spending very many spell slots on spells, so it's a good time to take a ritual spell. So I'm going to grab the alarm spell. So let's bring this character to 4th level, and then I can show you how the damage plays out. So when we go into our class features, we can go to our ability score improvement. Normally, when I'm playing a spellcaster at 4th level, I start looking at ways to short my concentration. Not with this character. This character is not going to be concentrating very often. I do have Fairy Fire right now. Might just switch it out to Grease at some point if I'm casting it at all. So I definitely want to increase my intelligence, because my intelligence is going to increase the spell DC, which is going to make my cannons do more damage. And it also increases my to hit roll, which is going to have my cantrips do more damage. And when we're combining those two, that's what this character does. They do damage. So we want to do everything we can to boost that. So the ability score improvement is going to be intelligence at level 4 and at level 8. I'm not even going to look at feats until I get to level 12. Now this means we get 2 additional prepared spells. I really don't need them because, again, I'm not having a lot of spell slots that I'm going to be spending on spells. But I do like to have absorb elements prepared because we might need it at some point. And even though we might not cast it on an average day, just having it there is good, especially when we have those extra slots. The other one I might consider grabbing is Identify. Identify is not a great ritual. We can do a lot of the same things with just the short rest. But the nice thing about Identify, you don't need to have the short rest. The other thing I like about Identify is if we have potions, it can help you identify poisons, that kind of thing. It doesn't help you detect cursed items. People tell me that all the time. But under cursed items, it specifically says Identify doesn't work for those. The other thing I want to note is we have gotten rid of Acid Splash and we've got Mending in its place. So if we look at the damage at 4th level, we can see our baseline. And if you don't know what the baseline is, I base this on a Warlock who increases their intelligence and uses the Hex spell and what kind of damage they would do with an Eldritch Blast. Because I figure that that's damage that is okay at level 1 and it's okay at level 20. And it kind of just stays okay all the way along. And it scales at the points you would think it would scale. So I've often used that as a baseline for what I consider to be okay damage. If you can't meet the baseline, you're not doing good damage. Now, last time I did a Battlesmith with a heavy crossbow, and we saw at level 4 they could pull in 12 points of damage compared to a baseline of 8. So they were well above the baseline, doing just fine. This character, and you can see I've got the wrong name there. That's because I've had multiple iterations of this video due to technical issues, and I've changed the name once or twice. But anyway, the level 4 damage, we can see it becomes 11, which is slightly less than the Battlesmith with the heavy crossbow, but still comfortably above the baseline. But that assumes that we're hitting a single target. If we can hit a second target with that flamethrower, it becomes almost 19 points of damage. That's over twice the baseline. That's amazing damage. So, like I said, that flamethrower is important because if we can hit a second creature with it, that brings our damage up a lot. Now, if we're willing to expend a spell slot and do a Thunder Wave, even if we hit a single creature, we're up to 18 points. And if we can hit multiple creatures with a Flamethrower, it's up to 25. And that doesn't even assume hitting multiple creatures with the Thunder Wave. So if we hit multiple creatures with the Thunder Wave, it's up from there. So again, even if we're just not expending any resources at all, we're doing reasonable damage, even against a single target. But if we can hit even a second target, it makes a big difference. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do some jumps. So I want to jump to those points where we're going to be looking at the damage. So I'm going to jump right from level 4 to level 8, and then I'm going to jump from level 8 to level 12, and I'm going to jump from level 12 to level 17, but we'll discuss what happens in between. At 6th level, we're going to get additional Artificer infusions, and we get 2 options. But remember, we're only creating 1 additional infusion. Now, one thing that happens at level 6 is we get options for some new enhancements to armor and weapons that are pretty good. The Radiant weapon is better than just a straight enhanced weapon. And then if somebody has a shield, the repulsion shield is quite a bit better than just an enhanced shield. So again, if we're buffing party members, these might be things I'd consider. Certainly, I would use them instead of the enhanced defense and enhanced weapon. Though technically you could do enhanced defense and repulsion shield at the same time, especially if you want one on somebody's armor and then another one on their shield. But this is a good time for us to switch out enhanced weapon, and I'd probably replicate a magic item. What I'd do is maybe grab Boots of Elvenkind. That would be really useful for a scout in the party. As we move down, we're going to see that also we have gotten our Arcane Firearm. This came up at 5th level, and what it does is it allows us to turn a wand, staff, or rod into an Arcane Firearm conduit for destructive spells. And the thing about this is we have an enhanced arcane focus that already is a wand, staff, or rod. So we will be using the enhanced arcane focus as our arcane firearm. The arcane firearm is not limited to non-magical things. So we do the enhanced arcane focus first, and then we make it an arcane firearm. What this will do is every time we cast a spell through it, we're going to roll a d8, and we get a bonus to damage based on what we rolled. So when we cast our Firebolt, and our Firebolt has scaled to a 2d10, and then it becomes 2d10 plus a d8. But that's not just our Firebolts, that's any spell we cast that deals damage. We're also going to get Tool Expertise, and then we're going to get Flash of Genius. Flash of Genius is a very good ability. Starting at 7th level, you gain the ability to come up with solutions under pressure. What it's going to be able to do is we can add our intelligence bonus to a saving throw we make, or an ally makes, or an ability check that we make, or our allies make, and it can be done a number of times equal to our intelligence bonus. So this becomes even better in the hands of an artificer who is boosting their intelligence instead of taking feats. And speaking of which, let's increase our intelligence right now. So at 8th level, we now have a 20 intelligence. And again, we haven't boosted our concentration saves. We're not concentrating on very much. In the rare case where we are concentrating on something, we'll probably take the web spell. Web spell is really good. We still have a good armor class, and we have a good constitution score. So it's not like our concentration is super fragile. But as we go into spells for 8th level, we're now going to be able to pick some 2nd level spells. And what we want to do here is, because we're not going to be using our 2nd level spells for creating cannons, we're going to be using our 1st level spells. Remember, these will be spells we're actually going to cast. Now, the 2 spells we always have prepared are spells I would definitely cast. The first one is Scorching Ray. Now, Scorching Ray, like a lot of the things we do, is fire damage, but when we are good doing fire damage, Scorching Ray is good. We're going to shoot 3 times, and they're all going to get the benefit of that enhanced arcane focus. So we're going to hit more often. And then as long as we hit once, we're going to be adding a d8 to the damage as well. So a good way to do damage to single targets. Now, if we have multiple targets, or we have a situation where maybe there's people that are immune to fire or resistant to fire, Shatter's a good option because it does thunder damage, which is seldom resisted. Obviously, this is a lot less effective than a fireball, which some casters can have at this level. But remember, this is being done in addition to our cannon. So it's this damage on top of that damage. And then we can hit a radius sphere It is something that's pretty easy to place in a way to hit multiple enemies for 3d8 points of thunder damage. But we have 3 additional preparations, and so we might as well pick spells that we might cast. Like I said, I'd be inclined to take Web. I don't know how much I'd cast it with this character. This character is really about blasting, but that's a nice control option to have. And then I would probably take a couple spells that are more circumstantial, because again, most of the time I'm going to be casting Scorching Ray or Shatter. So I would take stuff that when I need it, I really need it, but I don't need it very often. Lesser Restoration is one of those spells, and Rope Trick is one of those spells. So I would take those 2 spells as well. And most of the time, I wouldn't use my spell slots on them, but it would be nice to have them when I need it. So when we look at our character at 8th level, the baseline is now almost 18. We see our battlesmith with the heavy crossbow was able to do 21. Now, if we don't expend any resources and we are not hitting more than 1 target, our damage actually slips below the baseline. This is 16.9 essentially against a baseline of 17.7. But if we can hit 2 targets, it goes up to 24.3. So what it really comes down to is how often do we hit more than 1 target. I mean, sometimes we might even hit 3 targets with the flamethrower, but I wouldn't count on that happening very often. But let's say we can hit 2 targets half the time. Well, then our damage ends up being pretty darn close to the battlesmith with the heavy crossbow. And if we're willing to expand its Scorching Ray, we can bring that up to 25, or up to just about 33 if we can hit 2 targets with the flamethrower. So our damage here is barely above the baseline, I would say, on average, but it has slipped to the baseline compared to level 4. So what we are seeing is a slight decline. So the question is, what happens as we continue to level up? So for that reason, let's go to level 12 and see what happens. So when we go to level 12, if this character can't maintain the baseline, then I probably wouldn't play an Artillerist. So we begin with our Artificer infusions. And note that at level 12, our Enhanced Arcane Focus has improved, our Enhanced Defense has improved, and I would probably switch that Radiant Weapon back to Magic Weapon because that's improved as well. Then we're going to get 2 level 10 options. And let's replicate a couple magic items here. So we go down to level 10. First thing I note is Eyes of the Eagle is really useful, helps you with perception rolls. But the one I would probably use and I would probably spend an infusion on is Winged Boots. Winged Boots are actually a really good flying item, and they're available earlier than the other flying items. So I would definitely take them. Now, I'm not very fragile. I have a good armor class. I have lots of hit points. So I might give them to another party member. A melee character, maybe the character that has our cannon, might want it just in case we take on flying targets, for example. Then Winged Boots will be invaluable to them. So I would think that's worth an infusion slot for sure. As we move into our class abilities, we're going to see we got Explosive Cannon. This increases the damage rolls of the cannon by a d8. That's a 50% increase over the damage it did before. I will note that the Protection Cannon doesn't get a boost here. Only the Damaging Cannons do. But what I will also note is we're getting a fair amount of spell slots here. So I would still consider doing the Protection Cannon, and this is what I'd do. At the beginning of the day, I'd create a Protection Cannon. I'd give everybody a bunch of temporary hit points. I have a 20 intelligence now, so that would be 13 hit points. Then I would expand a first level spell slot to get the Flamethrower Cannon that I need. So then with a cost of 1 first level spell slot, that's 13 temporaries for everybody in the party. And we could do this at any time we wanted to. Now with our ability score improvement, as I said, we're going to take a feat here. And there's 2 ways you can go here, but I would go either with Ritual Caster Wizard or I would go with Magic Initiate Wizard because we want a first level spell, and that first level spell that we want is Find Familiar. Now I know that on D&D Beyond they seem to be giving me 3 ritual options. You don't actually get 3 ritual options with Ritual Spell, you get 2 ritual options. So I'll take Unseen Servant, but additional wizard spells that we find, I can copy into my ritual spellbook. So that could be anything else in addition to these 2 rituals. But the Find Familiar is the one we definitely want. And the reason we want it is because of our spell storing item. This comes in at level 11. at level 11, what we can do is we can take a simple weapon or a martial weapon, or we can take anything that we could use as a focus, and we can store a spell in there of first or second level, and it can be used a number of times equal to twice our intelligence modifier. Now we've boosted our intelligence to 20, so that's 10 castings. Now, this is why we want Find Familiar, because there are a number of things we could make that are very small. That can be a spell storing item. We could choose, say, a dagger, or we could choose thieves' tools, which are ridiculously small. And then what we could have is our owl familiar then grab the thieves' tools in their talons, and a familiar cannot take attacks, but a familiar isn't limited in other actions they can do. A homunculus is. So people who want to give their homunculus a spell storing item, be prepared for the fact that a homunculus cannot activate a spell storing item during combat. It's not listed as the available options. But the familiar doesn't have that restriction, and that's why we want the familiar. So we're going to give our owl familiar, might be something else, but we'll say it's an owl, a spell storing item with a spell that they can cast in combat. And I'll show you what I would probably do with that. Final thing here is Magic Item Adept. We can attune up to 4 magic items at once. This is really useful. I kind of gloss over this because we don't know what those items are going to be. But getting an additional attunement slot is great. And we can craft magic items that are common or uncommon, faster and cheaper. So if we don't have enough magic items, maybe we can just make our own. So at 12th level, we are now going to have 3rd level spells. And the spells we're going to have prepared all the time are Fireball and Windwall. Windwall I'm not going to talk about a lot. I'm not going to be casting it a lot. Fireball I'm going to be casting all the time because it is an easy to play spell. We can usually hit multiple creatures with it, and it does reasonable damage. So Fireball is definitely the spell I would lean on most of the time with my 3rd level slots, but I am going to have a couple more preparations. So what I would definitely want to do is pick spells, again, that are circumstantial. That might come up once in a while, but if they come up, I'd be glad to have them. Revivify is one of those spells, and Dispel Magic is another one of those spells. We are also going to get additional cantrip. Now, I'm not going to grab Acid Splash again because I have now the Enhanced Arcane Focus. In fact, it's a +2 now. So I'd be inclined to take another spell that requires an attack roll. So if something is immune to fire or resistant to fire, then let's grab Ray of Frost, and then that gives us a cold option instead. So as I mentioned, we probably have our familiar use our spell infused item, and our familiar cannot take attacks. So that means we don't want to do something like Scorching Ray. So Shatter is really the obvious choice here because then they're not making an attack, they're just placing a spell, which a familiar is allowed to do. So with our spell storing item, we infuse it with Shatter. They could cast it 10 times. So that's a lot of times, and that is calculated into our damage, and it definitely makes a big difference. Now, when we look at our damage, we're assuming that they're hitting one creature with Shatter. Often they're going to hit more than one creature, so just keep that in mind that often it's going to end up being more than what it shows on the chart. So that is the character at level 12. That's everything they get. So let's see how that looks on the damage chart. So as we do our calculations for level 12, we found that baseline was 27 points of damage. Battlesmith was nicely above that, just about 37 points of damage. With this character, we are at 40 points of damage. That is way above the baseline, 40 points of damage. And if we can hit multiple creatures, it becomes 51 points of damage. So almost double the baseline as long as we could hit a second creature. And then Fireball would bring it up to 51, and that assumes one creature with a Fireball. Every creature in addition that we hit with a Fireball, that's another 11 points of damage. And then if we hit another creature with our Flamethrower, that's another 10 points of damage. So we can get way above the baseline, way above double the baseline if we're expending resources. But if we're not expending resources, we are doing really well for damage here. We've really recovered from level 8. So now I want to do the final jump. We're going to bring this character to level 17 and just see what it gets. So we're going to get more Artificer Infusions. We can create one more and we get 2 more options. So I would be doing Replicate Magic Item with both these slots. Lots of good magic items available at this level. Let's grab Amulet of Health, and let's grab a Belt of Giant Strength. But it really depends on what your party needs for what you would take. But those will be the items we take with this character. We are also going to get Magic Item Savant, so now we can do 5 magic items at once, and we can pick any magic item we want. We don't have to worry anymore about class restrictions or anything like that. So we can use spell scrolls that are druid spells. For example, the big thing we get at this level is Fortified Position. This is huge. First thing that happens is you and your allies have half cover well within 10 feet of a cannon you create with an Eldritch Cannon as a result of a shimmering field of magical protection that the cannon emits. So the first thing to remember is that we're creating tiny cannons that are going on our melee character. So these are the characters that really could use that additional +2 armor class bonus. And that armor class bonus is going to stack with everything they've got. None of them are probably getting any cover bonuses. So this is basically going to be a +2 armor class for everyone in melee. And we can now have 2 cannons at the same time, so our cannons double in power. Technically, if we were concerned about wanting to hit as many people as we could with a half cover, we could do 1 cannon on one character, 1 cannon on another. Though if you played with a paladin in your party, you'll probably find that the melee characters tend to cluster pretty good when there's advantages in doing so. So there's no reason why you couldn't have each Eldritch Cannon on each shoulder of a melee character. Then they have 2 shoulder-mounted blasting cannons. But this is a huge boost to our offense and a boost to our defense as well. And then we get a final ability score improvement. And we could go a lot of different ways here. What I will do is I'm going to go Elemental Adept Fire. It's going to boost the damage from our fire spells a little bit. It will allow us to bypass resistance to fire, and certainly a lot of our damage is based on fire. But keep in mind, this is not actually going to help our fire throwing cannon. So our fire throwing cannon is still going to have to deal with resistance and immunity. And if we come across that, we're probably going to want to use our action and change those cannons. But for our own spells, like say our fireball spell, then this will be a useful thing to have. Then going into our spells, remember we are a 17th level caster now. We're going to get an additional cantrip, and it really doesn't matter what you pick here. I would pick Thorn Whip maybe, because we can still take advantage of our enhanced arcane focus, and it has a battlefield control aspect to it as well. Then I would look at 4th level spells. Let's pick 1 4th level spell. We're always going to have Ice Storm prepared. We're always going to have Wall of Fire prepared. Neither of them are fantastic spells, but I would be using them with my 4th level slots. Remember, Ice Storm at least doesn't do fire damage, so if we are going up against fire immunity, it gives us another option. But I would be inclined to grab a utility spell here. So let's grab Arcane Eye. And then for our 5th level spells, we're always going to have Cone of Cold prepared. We're always going to have Wall of Force prepared. Wall of Force I've talked about many times. 17th level is late for it to come on, but it's still a good spell. But Cone of Cold, the thing I really like about Cone of Cold is it is a 60-foot cone. So potentially we can fit just a ton of creatures in there, more than we can in, say, a fireball. But it is also harder to place. Cones are harder to place than spheres. So it really depends. Cone of Cold to be something I just kind of keep track of. And when the moment comes where I can hit a bunch of creatures with it, that's when I would do a Cone of Cold. And the damage is reasonably good. And that gives us 1 more spell preparation at this level. Like I said, I'm probably just casting Cone of Cold or Wall of Force with my spell slot. But let's grab Greater Restoration, because again, it's one of those things that you don't plan on needing, but when you need it, you really need it. And then I will just talk briefly about Animate Objects, because that's what I took with my Battlesmiths, and it was really important to their damage calculations. But because we're using our bonus action for our cannons, and our cannons are so effective, we're better off not doing Animate Objects, but just using our cannons instead. And that saves us a 5th level spell slot. It also saves us the action at the beginning of combat required to use the Animate Objects. So as we go into our damage chart, just keep that in mind, that we're comparing this against somebody who is using Animate Objects. So they're using a 5th level slot that they don't have an unlimited number of, and they're using their action at the beginning of combat. The baseline ends up being about 35 points of damage. Battlesmith with a heavy crossbow could do 53 points of damage. If the creature was resistant to the animate objects, which it very well might be, it then would be down to 37, which was still technically over the baseline. This character is doing 60 points of damage, over 60 points of damage, with the cantrip and the cannons hitting a single target. If we hit multiple targets with those cannons, it goes up to 87 points of damage. So we are almost double the baseline right away without expending any resources at all, and just hitting single targets. And we are over the double the baseline, well over the double the baseline, as long as we can hit multiple targets. And then if we expend some spell slots, we can bring this up to 70, over 100, well over that if we're hitting multiple creatures with Cone of Cold. This Cone of Cold actually assumes we're only hitting a single creature. So that's the Artillerist. And what we see is that overall, the damage is actually quite good. And surprisingly, the damage actually increases as we get into higher levels. So we actually see the Artillerist performing exceptionally well at very high levels, which was unexpected to me. I kind of figured it would come in strong and maybe taper off. But what we saw is it came in reasonably strong, and it did taper off a little bit. This happens basically at level 5, takes down to level 8 is probably the worst snapshot we get. And then as soon as we get that explosive cannon, then things pick back up again. And when I see that, I think that if I was to redesign the Artificer, I would like to see explosive cannon come in a little bit earlier. But it doesn't. But regardless, as soon as you get it, then you're back in the game. And eventually, you become quite effective at damage. And regardless of your level, if you can hit multiple creatures, you're effective with damage, provided they're not resistant or immune to fire. Because I don't want to gloss over the one Achilles heel. The big Achilles heel here is if you're doing the wrong kind of damage to an enemy, then you become ineffective with damage. And that's what this character does. So if you are going to be in a campaign, maybe talk to your DM and ask them, I want to play this character. It has a bunch of fire damage. Am I going to get screwed? If I was your DM, I'd tell you. If I knew you were going to be facing a bunch of stuff resistant or immune to fire, I would just let you know, and then you play something else. But this isn't unique to the Artificer. If you want to play a Draconic Sorcerer, and you're going to be a Red Dragon Draconic Sorcerer, and you're going to be using Fireballs and Scorching Rays and all the rest, you're in the same boat. So just remember that this isn't just an Artificer problem. This is a general design problem. Most of the good spells happen to be fire spells. And this character is going to be doing fire damage. But presuming you're in a campaign where fire resistance, fire immunity might come up occasionally, but aren't going to come up all the time, I do think that this is an effective subclass. And then that makes for 2 out of 3 effective subclasses for the Artificer. So overall, I think that's not bad. And I would definitely play an Artificer. I would play a Battlesmith or an Artillerist. I wouldn't necessarily jump to Alchemist. But what I do want to do in following weeks is maybe see if there's things we can do that are interesting in terms of multi-classing with the Artificer. But in terms of straight class Artificer, I think it does just fine. So we'll be looking at some of those things in the weeks to come. Until then, I'm going to sit back, relax, have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, Optimancers, and I'll see you next week.